episode, we're going to do things a little bit different. And we're going to talk about the toys I wish I still had. So, stick around. Hello friends and welcome to Days of Dorker Past. My name is Rob and in this episode we're going to talk about the toys I wish I still had. Now usually I'm whining about the toys that I wish I had. You know, the toys that slip between my fingers. Either Santa didn't bring them, my parents didn't buy them, or just for whatever reason I didn't have them. Now this is going to be a list of toys I actually had, and through happenstance or yard sales or they broke, I don't have them anymore. And they're ones that I still yearn for today. Maybe I'm looking back at them with rose-tinted glasses and they're not as great as I remember, but the nostalgia is still there and I would love to have them. So, after this episode, we're going to do a follow-up where I dive into eBay and see if there's any way that I can get some of these in my collection again. But anyway, this episode will be filled with how I got the toys, if I can remember, how I played with the toys, and what happened to them, if I can even remember that. Now, without further ado, number one on the list is a big one that I still think about to this very day. Fisher-Price's Adventure People Alpha Recon. At the time, Fisher-Price was a toddler-friendly extension of Kenner. And it is today, but through Hasbro. But back then, it was through Kenner. And these toys share a strong pedigree with the Star Wars toys. They had the same amount of articulation, and even as a little factoid, some of the Star Wars figures were made by Adventure People being the mock-ups. Like some of the most famous ones, and if I can find a picture I'll throw it up, were them making Chewie's family from the holiday special. They were going to make action figures of them. So they took Adventure People action figures and molded Chewbacca-like fur onto them to give the different sizes, because the Adventure People came in different sizes. Most of the Adventure People were based on real-life professions, EMTs, firefighters, and the like. Now, the Alpha Recon set was based on an astronaut, but it was a little bit more fanciful than other ones in the line. What the set came with, you got an orange lunar rover. It was very square and very squat, but I remember the wheels rolled fantastic on it. Now, it also came with a small tower that would plug into the back of it with a small satellite dish on top. Now, the driver that came with it, the astronaut, was a great design. I mean, if you were to compare it to something, it would be like the original Deep Six, where you got a person in a big thick suit with a dome type helmet, and this one had like a blue tint helmet, glass over it with like these binocular things on them. Now, right off the bat, it was better than Deep Six because you could actually move his legs. Now, Deep Six only had arms that moved. This had arms and legs that moved. Anyway, I remember the figure worked perfectly with anything. It fit with Star Wars, it fit with G.I. Joe. It was the right scale, and just that right fanciful adventure person that could fit in any scenario. He could be one of the astronaut type of dudes hanging out at the cantina in Star Wars, or like I said, in a pinch, he could be a substitute for Deep Six. Now, I remember loving the figure, but I don't remember whatever happened to it. But the lunar rover, that was where a lot of my adventures came from, and a lot of story building came from that. Because it was one of the very first vehicles I remember owning. So that worked for my Star Wars and my G.I. Joe. I mean, it was just a little seat that the person would sit in. And like I said, it rolled perfect. So, I mean, I didn't pretend it was any other vehicle other than it was this lunar rover with this tower on the back. And that tower you could pop off and use. Like if you made a little pillow fort for your G.I. Joes, you could put that little tower on the outside, and right there they have a communications link. It was just so much fun. I don't remember what happened to it. I don't even remember how I got it. I'm sure it was probably a Christmas. But since the line started in the early 70s, I believe, I probably got it when I was really young. And I don't remember that experience. And I don't remember the experience of losing it. I just remember, like now, looking back at it and saying, I wish I still had that, because it was such a big foundation to a lot of my early action figure adventures. Number 2 on the list is kind of a bulk item. It was 2 action figures and a vehicle, if you will, from the movie Clash of the Titans. And it was Perseus, Calibus, and Pegasus. Now, I'll straight up admit it, I don't care. Growing up, I liked Luke Skywalker, but Perseus was the hero that I wanted to be. I have vivid memories of walking into the theater with Clash of the Titans already on the screen because we were running a couple minutes late, and some of the scenes in that movie were very eye-opening for a young, impressionable male. That movie really pushed the boundaries. I mean, probably not at the time, but now that would probably be an R-rated movie. I mean, it was chock full of nudity and violence, but back then it was like a family film. And that adventure from start to finish in one movie just resonated more with me, and was probably one of the first VCR tapes we had. I think it was actually bootlegged from my father and his friend. My father's friend had a Betamax, we had a VCR, and they would rip cassettes for each other. They would get together with their machines, and so like my first 3 movies I remember were these ones that either my dad or his friend made these tags where they tried to emulate the font and everything and it was Star Wars, Clash of the Titans, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So those were my first 3, and the first 3 that meant a lot to me. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. Anyway, these figures were made by Mattel at the time, and I shouldn't say at the time, the only time. They didn't do as well as I'm sure they envisioned. I mean, everything was viewed through a Star Wars filter. If it wasn't making Star Wars money, it wasn't doing well. So they did a small little toy line and blinked and you missed it. But I was lucky enough to get Perseus and Calibus. I don't remember, but I do remember getting Pegasus for Christmas, and it was awesome. Unfortunately, the wings on Pegasus were a soft rubber, and they would fit with tabs onto the side of the horse body. So once, as a kid, you're popping them on, popping them off, throwing other characters on them, the wings ended up getting really busted up, and probably it ended up being tossed. Now, I remember Perseus and Calibus, like I said, I don't remember when I got them, and I don't remember when I lost them, but I remember some of the adventures that I had with them, because one story that stands out in my mind, or memory that stands out in my mind, is my aunt at her house. They had a large fire pit, and it was stones stacked up all around. And I remember, when it wasn't in use, I would play around that rock pile. And I remember having adventures with Perseus versus Calibus on this rock pile one day, just from sun up to sundown. And that, really is a strong memory of mine that I would love to get them again. In the accessories episode, I still have Perseus's shield. The sword's long gone, but I had the shield, and I mean, like I said, the figures, I don't know what happened to them. So we'll do a little look on eBay later and see how much those suckers go for, because I would love, love, love to get them back in my collection. But if I can only score a Calibus, I'd be happy enough with that. Number 3 on the list is the Night Raven from G.I. Joe. This Lockheed-inspired Cobra vehicle was awesome. And I remember it wasn't very expensive. I mean, it wouldn't have been for my parents to actually get it for me. I did not have that many vehicles growing up. So if I scored one of those, which I remember when, it must have been cheap. I remember we were at the Kmart in our town, and I just remember the size of the box. And like I said, it must have been cheap for my parents to actually let me get it. I mean, it has to be one of the largest flying action figure vehicles that has ever been made. I mean, the sucker had to be 2.5 feet, 3 feet in length. Now, it didn't have a lot really going for it, if you think about it. I mean, it was just a large hunk of plastic. I was going to say metal, but a large hunk of plastic with a drop-down cockpit that you would put the pilot in, and I think there was a second seat facing the other way that you would push back up. And it came with a smaller little pod on the back that would go in. And of course, I had the missiles and things like that that all the G.I. Joe jets and vehicles had at the time. And I just remember being in awe of this thing because of the size, just how sleek it was, because the stealth Lockheed was like the plane at the time, like the stealth bomber would be today. I mean, it was cutting edge technology. I mean, I remember I had a little Hot Wheels of the Lockheed. I mean, I was just infatuated with that plane growing up. So to have this huge one, I mean, it was awesome. The only problem is, and in later installments we'll go over some of these, but my parents, or just my mom, had a real hang up over big toys. Like, I was allowed to play with them, but as soon as they got put into a corner for more than like a day or two without me playing with them, they were out the door, because she thought they just took up too much space. Now, I don't have any vivid memories to what happened to the Night Raven, but I just remember it was gone. And I mean, growing up, it was easy to just move past things like that, but as an adult, when you think back at it, man, I mean, I wish I still had that. Do I have the room for something like that now? No, but I would find the room. Number 4 on the list is the MTV-7 from Star Wars. Now, Star Wars was definitely a toy line that I did not have a lot of vehicles of. I had a good deal of figures, but not a lot of vehicles. Now, Star Wars was something that my parents could get behind as well, because they were fans of the films just like me. So I think they took joy in actually seeing the action figures around the house and me enjoying them and playing with them. Now, at the time Empire Strikes Back came out, they started producing smaller vehicles that weren't on the screen, but were created for the toy line. And the MTV-7 was one of them. It was supposed to be the Hoth soldiers, the rebel soldiers, small one-man vehicle. You'll see in the picture, but it had long, I guess you'd say, axles or whatever with the wheels at the bottom, with just a one-man small compartment at the top with one little laser gun. And what was cool is you could push it down so the legs would go out like this, and once you let it go, it'd pop back up. So it was a neat transforming type of vehicle that, again, I used for all my action figures at the time. I mean, I'm sure even Perseus and Calibus tooled around, and well, maybe not Calibus because with his tail, but definitely Perseus probably drove around in it, my G.I. Joe figures and my Star Wars figures. And it was that transforming thing that made it extra awesome, because you could pretend things, like I said when I made a pillow fort for my G.I. Joe, you could set up blankets to be mountain ranges or snowdrifts or whatever your imagination saw them as. So, you know, you could do like a tunnel, it's driving towards the tunnel, and uh-oh, we got to shrink down to fit, so you would hold it down, so now it's a smaller vehicle that you could get through to those spots and either save your comrades or take out the villains or whatever. Again, this is a toy that I don't remember what happened to it. I remember the great adventures I had with it. I remember that, like I said, all my action figures enjoyed it, but again, it just disappeared like the sands of time. It just blew away, and I don't remember what happened to it. But again, I hope I can find it again, and since it's not like a on-screen vehicle, maybe I'll luck out and it'll be a little bit cheaper. Now, number 5 is a big one. And I'll say right now, I don't remember what happened to it, but it was a toy that I envisioned was a living, breathing thing at the time. I think I've talked about that in the past with like my Ewok action figures or my Gizmo toys, that I would pretend it was like a real pet, and that is Battle Cat from Masters of the Universe. I loved this toy. Definitely one of my favorites. And, I mean, with the background of it, that it was just a repaint of the Big Jim or whatever, Tiger. I mean, awesome little backstory, but it just, what a simplistic and awesome figure, vehicle, toy, whatever you want to call it. I love the armor. I mean, I love that it has a helmet. The saddle was awesome, and I kind of have a fuzzy recollection of getting it one Christmas. Like, that was one of my big gifts. But, oh man, I just remember, I mean, Masters of the Universe figures, still to this day, I mean, I love G.I. Joe, that's probably my number 1 toy line, but Masters of the Universe, there's just something that when I see one of the old figures, I get a shiver of nostalgia. I mean, there's just something about those figures more than any of the others that I want to get and I want to feel again. I mean, I think just because G.I. Joe has always been there for me and I've always collected it, I just don't have that same, like I said, a nostalgic shiver or something when I see it. It just makes me feel a different way and makes me feel excited. So I'm pretty sure that he probably goes for a lot of money, but here's hoping I can find one. But he definitely needs the armor. Again, don't know what happened to him. I know my, what's his name, the Panther that Skeletor rode, that got thrown away because that flocking on it started to peel up, and my parents just pitched it because it looked dirty and nasty. But Battle Cat, I don't remember. But anyway, that was just 5 toys that I wish I still had. There goes a cat in the background over here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you got something to say, please leave a comment. I love reading them and I love getting back to everybody. And if you're new around here and you enjoyed this or any of the other episodes that YouTube is recommending or that you find on my channel, please hit subscribe. And if you hit that little bell icon, you will be notified whenever there's a new episode. So until next time, keep being rad and stay dorky.